Welcome to lesson 9 on our series on exceptions. Lesson, there's a catch to null. We're going to have a look at what effects does null have in a try catch, specifically in the catch. Okay, yeah, I've got a little class where I'm simulating that I'm updating a database. And as you can see, I've called it public class test. I've got an SQL exception here, an import statement. And if you look at my main method, I'm saying try to update. I'm calling an update method, which is this method here, that could possibly throw an SQL exception. So if I call this method, and what's happening is in this try catch, I'm actually saying I'm throwing an SQL exception. So I'm saying, let's say that while I was updating, did throw an SQL exception. Then I'm catching it, and as you can see, I'm using the superclass of the SQL, which is fine as you saw before. And I'm rethrowing this exception, and then I'm catching it here as an SQL exception. If you recall from previous videos, that is totally legal. And as you can see, let's just see what happens if I run it. And I'm going to run it. And you see the message that I got here, I'm getting it over there. So it's working fine. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm going to comment this line out here. And let's say I throw a null value. Instead of throwing E, I'm throwing a null value. What do you think? Will it compile? Is it going to give me the same message I got previously? Could not update database, or what else could it go wrong? Let's see this one. I'm going to run it, and you see I get a java.lang.NullPointerException. So because I'm throwing a null value here, it automatically throws a runtime exception, not a caught exception. It's not being, because it's a runtime exception. You see I'm trying to catch an SQL exception here. So yeah, it throws a null pointer exception, as you can see from test 26, line 26. It propagates to line 18, which is this one. So this one here is throwing a null pointer exception. And as I'm catching an SQL exception here, it doesn't catch it here. So it goes all the way to the JVM, and the JVM then, before it terminates the program, it will print out the stack trace. And this is what I'm getting over here. In this example, what I've done here is I've commented it out now. So let's see what happens. When I catch this exception here, if I assign null to this exception, and then I throw this exception with my code as it is, because I'm throwing a new SQL exception here, and I'm catching it as an exception here, and then I will initialize it to null. So I'll make that exception a null, and I'll throw it again. What's going to happen in this case? In the previous case we saw, when we throw null, it throws a runtime null pointer exception, a runtime exception of type null pointer exception. In this case, as I initialize this to null, and then I'm rethrowing it, is it going to give me a null pointer exception, you think, or is it going to print out could not update the database and so on? So let's see. Yes, I'm going to uncomment this, and as you can see, I'm getting a compiler error here, unhandled exception. Now why is it an unhandled exception? Since I'm handling the SQL exception that I threw here. When you initialize in this case I've assigned null to an SQL exception. It can be an exception of any type, of any type of exception. And as I'm saying that I'm declaring that I possibly throw an SQL exception, and this could be of any type, it's going to give me an unhandled exception here. Okay, so to fix this, do you guys think, okay, if I change this then to an exception here, will that solve my problem? Well, it seems to solve my problem, yeah, because it can be of any type and I'm catching the superclass exception here. But you'll see I've got a problem over here, because now it can be of any type and my update is declaring that it's throwing an exception here, and I am catching an SQL exception here. So here again I've got an unhandled exception, so I would have to change this one as well to an exception here. Then I don't seem to have any more errors, and let's run this, and you see it gives me null because I threw null, and the message is null. Okay, so let's just look at this again. So we know that even though we throw in SQL exception here, because we're initializing it to null, it could effectively be any exception it's throwing here. It can be of type exception. We catch an SQL exception here, so it doesn't compile. To prove it, if I just comment that out, now the only exception that could be thrown is E, which is SQL. So even though this type here is exception, it knows it's an SQL exception, so it's legal, and I'm catching an SQL exception here. Okay, but now what if I change this value to SQL here? If I change this value to SQL, then it's only possible because of the E is now SQL and not the exception anymore. This is only possible that it's of type SQL, and therefore that line and this line is legal. But what will be the output here? Is it going to be caught here and print out the message could not update the database, or is it going to be something else? So let's just have a look here, and you'll see a null pointer exception is thrown. Why is that? Because remember, even though we're declaring to throw an SQL exception here, when we're throwing, we're throwing null. So it's going to throw a null pointer exception, and it's legal to throw a null pointer exception without catching it because it's a runtime exception. So we're not catching a null pointer exception when it comes back here. So it doesn't catch it here. It goes all the way to the main method, the virtual machine, then stops the program, and when it stops it, it prints out the stack trace. Okay, if I had to change this one here to an exception, it would still compile. I'm throwing a null pointer exception here, but because this is an exception, it's a superclass of all exceptions, it should print a message here. Let's see what it does now. So if I run it, and you see it prints null, the message, that get message is null. Okay, yeah, we came to the end of lesson 9 on exceptions, specifically looking at null values in a try catch. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please comment and subscribe to my channel, like and so on. I've also got a Facebook page related to this channel, and see you next time.